Marcus, your negligence almost cost us the Hartman deal. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. My hands tightened around my laptop until my knuckles went pale. Every single person in the conference room turned to look at me at the exact same moment. Some had wide eyes. Others had tight lips pressed together the way people do when they are glad it is not them. Mr. Hargrove stood at the head of the table, smiling. Not a warm smile. A cold one. The kind that knows exactly what it is doing. He flipped through the presentation slides on the big screen and spoke about strategy and financial modeling and client analysis like the words belonged to him. Like the late nights belonged to him. Like the 3 years of research I had poured my entire life into had simply always been his. The investors sat in a neat row across from me. Expensive suits. Sharp eyes. One of them, an older man with silver-framed glasses, leaned slightly forward in his chair. Just slightly. But I noticed. My name is Marcus Reed. I had built that entire proposal from scratch. Every word. Every number. Every page. And I had just been accused of sabotaging it. It did not start with one big moment. That is the thing about this kind of betrayal, it sneaks up on you wearing the clothes of small mistakes and bad luck. It started about 8 months before the Hartman meeting. An email I sent to the entire project team somehow never reached Mr. Hargrove's inbox. That was what he told me, anyway. So my idea, a revised client segmentation model that I had worked on for 2 weekends straight, was never officially discussed. Then 3 weeks later, a version of that same model appeared in a team presentation. No credit given. No mention of my name. I brought it up quietly to a colleague named Pete. Pete shrugged and said, "Maybe it's a coincidence, Marcus. Don't make it weird." So I let it go. Then it happened again. A cost projection I had sent in for review came back with my name removed from the header. I was told it was a formatting issue. Then a client brief I drafted was presented to the regional director without any reference to me. My boss mentioned the team, but somehow could never recall who specifically had written it. Small things. Easy to dismiss. Easy to explain away. That was the whole point. I did not yell that day in the conference room. I did not stand up and slam my hand on the table. I did not storm toward the door with hot tears burning my face. I breathed. One slow breath in. One slow breath out. I had practiced this. Not in a dramatic way, not like I had predicted this exact moment. But somewhere deep in my gut, in the quiet place where truth lives, I had known this day was coming. And I had decided long before it arrived that when it came, I would not give Mr. Hargrove the reaction he was counting on. Because that was what he wanted. He wanted me to look unstable. He wanted the investors to see a rattled, emotional employee who could not handle pressure. If I exploded, I became the problem. If I became the problem, the story shifted away from the work and onto me. So I sat still. I kept my face steady. I watched him present slide after slide of my research like a magician performing someone else's trick and taking the bow anyway. Inside, a storm was raging. My mind was loud and fast and furious. But outside, I was calm water. Still. Flat. Waiting. The investors were watching him. But 1 or 2 of them were watching me too. 6 months before the Hartman deal became the centerpiece of everything, I had sat in a Tuesday morning team meeting with a printed proposal in my hands. I had spent 3 evenings on it. A revised pitch strategy that would shift our approach from broad market targeting to focused client niche positioning. I had the data to back it up. I had the numbers laid out cleanly on 2 pages. I presented it. Mr. Hargrove nodded thoughtfully. He asked 1 or 2 questions. He said it had potential. The team listened politely and moved on. I went back to my desk feeling cautiously hopeful. 2 weeks later, Mr. Hargrove walked into the next team meeting and presented the same strategy. Same logic. Same positioning angle. He had rephrased a few things, reorganized the bullet points, and added one extra slide. But it was my work. Anyone who had been in both meetings would have seen it. Nobody said anything. A few colleagues shot me quick glances. Pete looked down at his notebook. After the meeting, I went to the bathroom and stood over the sink for a long moment. I looked at my reflection. I was not imagining it. I was not being sensitive. Something was being done to me deliberately and carefully. I just did not have proof yet. The moment I started to suspect that something deliberate was happening, I changed how I worked. Quietly. Without telling anyone. Every draft I produced, I saved in two places. One was my work computer. The other was a personal secure cloud folder that only I had access to. I named each file with the exact date and time I created it. If I made changes, I saved a new version rather than overwriting the old one. Within 3 months I had a complete, time-stamped record of every document I had ever produced for the Hartman project. I also started being more careful with emails. When I sent something important, I sent it to myself as well, blind copy, so it appeared in my personal inbox with a timestamp from my own server. I kept a private notebook where I recorded meeting dates, what was discussed, and what I contributed. Short sentences. Just facts. Nobody noticed. Mr. Hargrove did not notice. His assistant, a quiet man named Philip who always seemed slightly uncomfortable around his boss, certainly did not notice. The rest of the team was too focused on their own deadlines. I was building something. Slowly. Carefully. A silent wall of evidence that no one could see yet. Not because I wanted war. Because I had learned that in this kind of situation, preparation is the only thing that cannot be taken from you. After Mr. Hargrove finished his presentation, the room did not immediately burst into questions. There was a pause. A thick, loaded kind of silence that sat over the conference table like fog. A few investors exchanged glances. Not the kind of glances that mean nothing, the kind that carry whole conversations inside them. The silver glasses man wrote something in his notepad. Another investor, a younger woman named Ms. Adler, tapped 2 fingers slowly against the table. Mr. Hargrove's smile was still there, but it had shifted. It was tighter now. Less easy. His jaw was set in a way that looked comfortable from across the room, but I was close enough to see the small muscle working just below his ear. I kept quiet. I did not jump in. I did not challenge him then and there in front of the room. Because I had learned something important in all those months of watching and waiting. Silence, used at the right moment, is not weakness. It is pressure. When you stay quiet and composed while someone expects you to break, you are the one in control. Even if nobody in the room knows it yet. I sat with my hands flat on the table and let the silence stretch. And in that stretch, I could feel the investors' attention shifting. Just slightly. Just enough. After the meeting, I found Pete in the small kitchen on the 4th floor. He was pouring coffee and staring at the machine like it owed him money. When he heard me come in, he turned around and his expression said everything. He had been in that room. He had heard everything. "Marcus," he started. "I know," I said. We were quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city moved on like nothing had happened. "What are you going to do?" Pete asked. I picked up a paper cup and filled it with water. Took a slow sip. Set it down. "I have every email," I said. "Every draft. Every version, time-stamped and stored. When the right moment comes, everyone in that building is going to see exactly who created that proposal." Pete stared at me. I could see him weighing whether I was calm or just numb. The truth was, I was neither. I was focused. There is a difference between someone who has accepted defeat and someone who has already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for the right conditions to reveal it. "Don't do anything rash," Pete said quietly. "I won't," I said. And I meant it completely. This was not about rage. Rage makes mistakes. This was about truth. And truth, properly documented, does not need emotion to land. I want to be clear about something, because I know how these situations can sound from the outside. People hear about workplace sabotage and they imagine dramatic confrontations, obvious power plays, shouting behind closed office doors. That was not what this was. What Mr. Hargrove did was quieter than that. More patient. More calculated. Every quarter, when the team assembled for project reviews, my contributions were folded into group summaries. The team developed this approach. We collectively identified this risk. The word "we" became a tool for erasure. It sounded generous on the surface. But generosity does not erase specific names. Generosity does not go back and edit documents to remove authorship. There were also the impossible edits. On 2 separate occasions I was given revision requests at 5 in the afternoon for materials needed the next morning at 8. The requests were technically reasonable but practically impossible given the scope. When I failed to meet them fully, it became a comment about my work pace, my reliability. Small marks against my record that added up over time. Looking at any single incident, you could argue coincidence. But I had been watching for months. I had the dates. I had the emails. And I had the pattern. When you lay it all out in a line, it stops looking like accidents. It starts looking like a plan. About a month after the conference room accusation, I made 2 phone calls that changed the direction of everything. The first was to a corporate attorney named Ms. Farrow. I had been referred to her through a friend of a friend. I explained the situation clearly and without emotion. I told her about the documentation I had collected, the time-stamped drafts, the blind copy emails, the version histories. She asked careful questions. At the end of our call she said, "Marcus, what you have is solid. Authorship is provable through metadata alone, and your paper trail goes well beyond that." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. The second call was to an independent project auditor named Mr. Cassidy. He specialized in corporate document verification. I explained I needed a professional opinion on the chain of authorship for a major proposal. I sent him access to my secure folder. Within 4 days he responded in writing, confirming that the document metadata, version history, and communication trail clearly established me as the original and primary author of the Hartman proposal. 2 independent professionals. 2 separate verifications. Both pointing to the same undeniable fact. I was not paranoid. I was not wrong. And now I was not alone. I requested a one-on-one meeting with Mr. Hargrove 2 weeks after the board session. I sent the calendar invite with the subject line, clarifying next steps on Hartman. Neutral. Professional. Completely unthreatening on the surface. He agreed without hesitation, which told me he was not worried. He still thought he had the upper hand. That confidence was the most useful thing about him. We sat across from each other in his office. He leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who believed the ground beneath him was solid. He talked for the first 5 minutes about the project timeline and client expectations. I nodded and listened. Then I slid a single sheet of paper across his desk. Not a legal document. Not a threatening letter. Just a short, clean memo I had written that morning. "I just wanted to note," I said quietly, "that all original drafts and communications related to the Hartman proposal are secured in my records. If there's ever any need to clarify authorship, for the investors, for internal review, for any reason, the documentation is ready." He picked up the paper. "Read it. Set it down." Then he laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Marcus, no one's questioning authorship." But I saw it. Just for a second. Behind the laugh, behind the easy confidence. A flicker of something that was not comfortable at all. The investors did not go away after the board presentation. That was what Mr. Hargrove had not counted on. Large investment groups like the ones involved in the Hartman deal have their own due diligence processes. They do not simply accept a polished presentation and write a check. They ask follow-up questions. They request documentation. They bring in their own analysts to cross-check the numbers and verify the methodology. And what those analysts found, apparently, did not line up neatly with Mr. Hargrove's narrative. I heard this through Ms. Adler, one of the investors who had been at the board meeting. She sent me a brief, careful email 3 weeks after the presentation. She wrote that her team had been reviewing the proposal documentation and had some questions about the origin of the financial modeling framework. She asked if I would be available for a short call. I replied within the hour. During the call she was measured and professional, but the questions she asked were specific. She wanted to know about the methodology behind the client risk matrix. She asked about the decision to use a particular projection model in the third section. These were not general questions. These were the questions of someone who already suspected the answers and wanted to hear them from the right person. My boss was sweating. He just did not know I already knew it. 3 days after my call with Ms. Adler, I received a message I had not expected. It came through a professional contact platform, not my work email. The sender was a senior partner at the investment group, a man named Mr. Okafor, who I had never spoken to directly before. His message was short. He asked if we could meet privately, off the record, before the next formal board review. He suggested coffee at a neutral location. I agreed. We met at a quiet place near the financial district on a Thursday morning. He arrived before me, already seated, already with his coffee. He was a calm man. The kind of calm that comes from years of reading rooms and situations correctly. He got straight to the point. We have our own records, Marcus, he said. Communication logs, submission timestamps from the shared project platform. We know who was driving this proposal from the beginning. I kept my face even, though something inside me released, like a fist slowly unclenching. I had carried this for so long. Having someone in a position of real authority say those words out loud was something I had not prepared myself to feel. The formal review hasn't happened yet, Mr. Okafor continued. But I wanted you to know, we are paying attention. He left first. I sat with my coffee for a long time after. That evening I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and every piece of documentation spread around me. Not because I needed to review it, I had been over it hundreds of times. But because I needed to organize it in a way that could be presented clearly and quickly when the moment came. I created a master folder. Inside it I organized everything into 5 sections. The first held the original proposal drafts, each labeled with the date and exact time of creation. The second held all related email threads, including the blind copies I had sent to my personal account. The third held the version history logs from the cloud platform showing every edit I had made and when. The fourth held my private meeting notes, handwritten, scanned, dated. The fifth held the written statements from Ms. Farrow and Mr. Cassidy, both confirming my authorship. I printed 2 complete copies and stored them in separate locations. One in my apartment. One in a secure locker at a business center downtown. Then I sent the digital folder to Ms. Farrow for safekeeping. I was not preparing for a fight. I was preparing for clarity. There is an important difference. A fight is emotional. Clarity is surgical. And what I had assembled was surgical enough to cut through every single excuse and deflection Mr. Hargrove could possibly produce. The next board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday. I received the calendar invite on a Monday. Mr. Hargrove sent it to the full team with a breezy message about finalizing the Hartman presentation for investor sign-off. He walked past my desk twice that week and both times he said nothing about our one-on-one conversation. He was back to his usual manner, easy, confident, the kind of man who takes up space in a room without apology. He had convinced himself, I think, that my quiet memo had been a bluff. That I was too careful about my job to actually push anything. He did not understand what kind of careful I was being. On Wednesday evening I sat in my apartment and did not review any documents. I had reviewed them enough. Instead I sat quietly and thought about the journey from that first stolen email idea 8 months ago to this point. I thought about all the times I had chosen patience over reaction. All the times the anger was real and present and I had felt it fully and then set it aside. I was not nervous about Thursday. Not in the way people expect. I felt something closer to stillness. The kind that comes when you have done everything within your power correctly, and the only thing left is to walk through the door. I packed my laptop bag carefully. Everything I needed was inside it. I arrived at the conference room 10 minutes early. The investors filed in shortly after, followed by 3 members of the executive team. Mr. Hargrove arrived last, which I recognized as a deliberate choice. Arriving last signals confidence. It says, I am the one everyone is waiting for. He opened the presentation. Same slides. Same delivery. The same smooth, practiced rhythm of a man who had done this before and expected to do it again. I let him get through the first 2 sections without interrupting. I was not there to humiliate him quickly. I was there to let the truth surface at its own pace, in front of the people who needed to see it most clearly. When he reached the 3rd section, the client risk matrix and projection model, I raised my hand slightly and spoke in a calm, even voice. Sorry to pause for just a moment, I said. I want to make sure there's no confusion for the investors. This section on the projection methodology, this is based directly on my original draft submitted in March. I can share the time-stamped version right now if it would be helpful. The room tensed like a wire pulled tight. Mr. Hargrove stopped mid-sentence. His eyes moved to me and for just 1 second I saw something cross his face. Not anger. Something closer to fear. He recovered fast. I will give him that. He laughed, that same short, dismissive sound from our one-on-one meeting, and said something about how the team had collectively developed the methodology over many sessions. He turned back to the screen and started talking again. But Ms. Adler spoke before he could get 2 sentences out. Marcus, she said, could you share those documents now? We'd like to review them alongside the presentation. I opened my laptop. I had the master folder ready on the screen before she finished the sentence. I turned the laptop slightly so the investors nearest to me could see clearly. I walked through 3 specific exhibits, the original draft with the March timestamp, the email I had sent to the team sharing that draft, and the version history showing every subsequent edit. Each document had a clear date. Each one had my name in the metadata. Each one was exactly what I had said it was. The questions that followed came quickly. Ms. Adler asked about the decision framework in Section 4. Mr. Okafor asked about the client profiling methodology in Section 2. I answered each question directly, with specific references to the documents on screen. Mr. Hargrove interjected twice. Both times the investors redirected their questions back to me. There is a particular silence that falls over a room when people realize they have been misled. It is different from ordinary quiet. It has weight to it. You can feel it pressing against the walls. That silence settled into the conference room sometime around the 40-minute mark of the meeting. Mr. Hargrove was still standing at the front of the room, but he no longer looked like the man who had walked in. His shoulders had shifted inward slightly. His answers were slower. When the investors asked him specific questions about the proposal's methodology, he used vague language, the team explored various approaches, and there were many contributing perspectives, which only created more questions. The investors were not aggressive. They were simply precise. And precision was the one thing Mr. Hargrove could not handle right now, because precision required specifics, and the specifics all pointed away from him. I stayed calm throughout. I did not press him or interrupt him. When investors asked me questions, I answered clearly and moved on. I was not trying to destroy him in that room. I was simply being accurate. The destruction was happening on its own, as a natural result of the truth being present. Pete, who was sitting near the back of the room as a project team representative, caught my eye once. He gave a very small nod. 20 minutes into the questioning, the door opened. Philip, Mr. Hargrove's quiet, always slightly uncomfortable assistant, stepped inside. He looked directly at the investors and not at his boss. That alone told me something significant was about to happen. He cleared his throat. I need to say something. I was asked to remove Marcus's name from several internal documents related to the Hartman proposal over the past 4 months. I have copies of both the original versions with his name and the revised versions without it. I thought I should make that available to the board. He placed a thin folder on the table. Then he stepped back and stood near the wall. The room was very still. Mr. Hargrove turned to look at Philip with an expression I had never seen on his face before. He opened his mouth, closed it. His usual confidence had no language for this moment. Philip had worked for him for 3 years. Philip, who had always been quiet and slightly uncomfortable, had apparently been keeping records of his own. I had not known about this. I had not planned for this. This was something Philip had decided to do entirely on his own, for reasons that were clearly his own conscience at work. The folder was opened. The investors leaned in. 15 minutes after Philip sat down, one of the board members, a woman named Ms. Reeves from the executive team, received an email during the meeting. She read it once, then read it again. Then she looked up. "I've just received a message from the external auditor," she said. Her voice was steady but careful. "The firm completed their independent review of the proposal documentation this morning. Their conclusion states that Marcus Reed is the sole primary author of the Hartman proposal, based on document metadata, version history, and communication records." She read one line from the email aloud. "No evidence of collaborative authorship was found that would establish shared ownership of the core framework and financial models." She set her phone face down on the table. Mr. Hargrove's face had gone pale. Not the pale of embarrassment. The pale of a man watching something collapse in real time and realizing there is absolutely nothing he can do to stop it. He looked at the investors. He looked at Ms. Reeves. He looked, briefly, at me. Murmurs moved through the room like a current through water. Some people shifted in their chairs. The older investor with the silver glasses, the one who had leaned slightly forward at the very first meeting, removed his glasses, cleaned them carefully, and put them back on. The kind of gesture that means a man is taking his time deciding what to say next. Mr. Hargrove tried. "I want to be honest about that." He did not simply fold without attempting to hold his position. He spoke in a measured tone, slower than usual, more deliberate, which told me he was drawing on every professional tool he had. He said that large projects naturally involve many contributors. He said that authorship in corporate settings was often a collaborative and fluid concept. He mentioned that his role as project lead required him to synthesize and elevate the work of his team, which meant the final product reflected his direction. Some of these arguments might have worked in a different room on a different day. But this room had Philip's folder on the table. This room had Ms. Reeves's email from the auditor still open on her phone. This room had my timestamped documents on my laptop screen. And this room was full of investors who had spent their careers identifying the difference between a person who understood something and a person who was describing it secondhand. One of the investors, a quiet man named Mr. Lund who had barely spoken during the whole meeting, asked a single question. "Mr. Hargrove, can you explain the decision behind the risk-weighting formula in Section 3 without referring to any materials?" A long pause. "It was a team discussion," Mr. Hargrove said finally. Mr. Lund wrote something in his notebook. Ms. Adler broke the final silence. She looked directly at me and asked the question that had been building in that room for the better part of an hour. "Marcus," she said, "who designed this proposal?" The room was completely still. Absolutely no sound except the faint hum of the air system overhead. Every single person at that table was looking at me. I did not rush the answer. I let the quiet sit for one breath. "I did," I said. What followed surprised me. 3 of the board members began to clap, not a wild enthusiastic applause but the deliberate, firm kind that people offer when they want to be clear about something. Ms. Reeves nodded slowly. Mr. Okafor looked at his colleague and said something in a low voice that I could not hear. Mr. Hargrove was standing at the front of the room with nowhere to go. His presentation was still on the screen behind him. His name was still on the title slide. But the room had made its decision about whose work it was, and no amount of title slides could undo that now. He did not speak again for the rest of the meeting. He stood there, very still, looking at the table. I felt no pleasure in it. I want to be honest about that too. I felt relief. I felt the clean, solid feeling of truth standing upright in a room that had been tilted against me for a long time. After the meeting formally closed, I stayed to answer questions from two of the investors. Mr. Hargrove left quickly. Philip slipped out without speaking to anyone. Pete waited in the hallway. I spent 40 minutes at that table going through the ownership documentation in detail. I showed them metadata trails. I walked through the email thread chronology. I explained the version history and what it proved about the creation timeline. I answered every question with the same calm, precise manner I had maintained since the moment I walked into the room. The investors were thorough. They were also, I could tell, reassessing everything, not just the proposal authorship but the entire structure of how the project had been managed. Questions about other presentations came up. About other documents. I answered only what I personally knew to be true and told them clearly when I could not speak to something. By the time I finished, Mr. Hargrove's closest ally on the team, a senior analyst named Mr. Briggs who had always made a point of publicly supporting everything the boss said, was sitting in the corner looking at his phone with the studied concentration of a man trying very hard to appear uninvolved. Even the people who had not been directly implicated were recalibrating. The room had shifted. Everything had shifted. And no amount of after-the-fact maneuvering was going to shift it back. The formal consequences took 4 days. On Friday morning, HR sent me a meeting request. I arrived to find 2 members of the HR leadership team and 1 executive director already seated. They had reviewed the documentation. They had spoken with the auditor. They had spoken with the investors. The meeting lasted 35 minutes. They asked me to walk them through the timeline of events from the beginning. I did so clearly and without emotional language. Just dates, documents, and facts. I handed them a printed copy of my complete evidence folder. On Monday, the executive director called me personally. Mr. Hargrove had been formally reprimanded and removed from his project leadership role. He was demoted to a non-client-facing position pending a broader internal review of past projects. He was barred from presenting or representing any work produced by team members without explicit written attribution going forward. His name was removed from the Hartman proposal in all official investor records. My name was restored as primary author. I thanked the executive director and ended the call. Then I sat at my desk for a moment and thought about all the mornings I had arrived early to a building where my name was being quietly erased. About all the meetings where I had watched my work become someone else's story. It was done now. And it had been done correctly. The weeks that followed were different in ways I had not fully anticipated. Ms. Adler's investment group sent a formal letter to the company recognizing my contribution to the Hartman proposal and recommending that I be assigned as the primary liaison for the contract's implementation phase. That was a direct, public acknowledgement from an external party, something that could not be quietly revised or reworded later. The executive team offered me a senior project lead role. I took my time before accepting. Not to be difficult, but because I had learned the value of reading an offer carefully before agreeing to it. I reviewed the terms, asked clear questions about authority and attribution, and accepted once I was satisfied. 2 clients from the Hartman Group reached out to me personally, not through the company's official channels but directly, through professional contacts. Both said the same kind of thing in different words. That they had followed the situation. That they respected how I had handled it. That they looked forward to working with me directly. Pete brought me coffee one morning and set it on my desk without saying anything. Then he said, "I should have said something sooner." "I'm sorry I didn't." "You know now," I said. "That's enough." And I meant it. I was not carrying any of the old weight anymore. There was no room for it alongside everything that was being built. There is a particular evening I keep coming back to in my mind. It was a Tuesday, about 3 weeks after everything had settled. I was in my office, my new office, which was larger and had a window that looked out over a row of old buildings with warm lights in the upper floors. I was not reviewing documents. I was not preparing for anything. I was just sitting, which is something I had forgotten how to do during those long months of careful preparation and quiet waiting. I thought about the morning Mr. Hargrove had stood in that conference room and told the investors that my negligence had almost cost them the deal. I remembered how the room had looked, how the air had felt, how my hands had gone tight around my laptop. I remembered choosing, in that exact moment, to breathe instead of react. That choice, and every quiet, deliberate choice that came before and after it, was what had made the difference. Not luck. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not a single explosive moment of accusation. Just months of careful, documented truth, stacked piece by piece until it became something no one could argue with. I had not set out to destroy Mr. Hargrove. I had set out to protect what was mine. And I had. Completely. Legally. Professionally. Without becoming something I did not want to be in the process. I looked out at the lights in those old buildings and felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not triumph. Something quieter and more lasting than that. Peace.